The snow came down in thin, silent sheets the morning Daniel Cross first saw the boy. It was the kind of snow that didn't howl or rage but settled quietly, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Every field lay buried beneath a pale, smooth blanket. The trees stood like frozen sentinels, their bare branches heavy with white. Even the crows had gone quiet. Daniel rode alone. He had ridden alone for a long time now. The road beneath his horse was little, more than a faint brown scar cutting. Through the whiteness, each slow step of the animal crunched and groaned beneath packed ice. Daniel's breath came out in pale clouds, vanishing as quickly as they formed. He kept his eyes forward, just as he always did. Looking around was dangerous. Looking around meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. And remembering was the one thing he had spent the last 6 years outrunning. 6 years since the fire. 6 years since his world had burned in a small wooden farmhouse that no longer existed. People spoke about time like it healed wounds, but Daniel knew better. Time didn't heal. It simply buried things under enough days that a man could almost pretend they weren't there. Almost. He had no particular destination. Only a general direction. The next town. The next job if one would take him. The next bed that didn't carry memories in its boards. He planned to pass straight through this stretch of country before dark and find an inn somewhere, beyond the hills. He would eat alone, drink alone, and sleep with his coat still on, ready to leave before sunrise. The same routine, the same protection. That was the plan. Then he saw the figure near the old stone well. A small shape, hunched low against the cold, half hidden by drifting snow. Daniel frowned slightly. Travelers didn't usually stop at the abandoned Harlan well. It hadn't drawn clean water in years. Folks said something had happened near it once. A man gone missing. A body never found. Some said the well itself had swallowed him. Daniel shifted in his saddle, his hand instinctively moving closer to the rope coiled on the horn. He slowed his horse but did not stop. As the shape moved, he saw it was not a grown traveler. It was a child, a boy no more than 8 or 9 years old, standing beside the broken stone rim with a thin coat hanging off narrow shoulders. His boots were too large, stuffed with cloth to keep them from slipping. Dark curls peeked out from beneath a wool cap that had seen better days. The boy was staring at the road, not at the ground or the horizon, at Daniel. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He simply waited. Daniel told himself to keep riding. Children had families. Children belonged somewhere. Children were complications. He had no place in a child's story. But then the boy spoke. "Mister, are you real?" The words were carried by the cold air, soft but clear. Daniel's horse came to a stop without being asked. Daniel looked down at him, heart tightening in a way he did not like. "I'm real enough." "What are you doing out here in this weather, son?" The boy swallowed, his cheeks red from wind and cold. "I've been waiting since dawn." "For what?" "For someone who don't look like he belongs to nobody else." Something about that answer unsettled him. Daniel glanced around the empty fields. No smoke from chimneys, no wagons, no movement except falling snow. "Where's your family?" he asked. The boy's eyes dropped for a moment before lifting again. "Ain't got none anymore." Daniel felt that familiar tightening. Deeper now, closer to the bone. "Everyone's got someone." The boy shook his head slowly. "Not after last winter." The silence that followed was too big, too heavy for a child to be carrying by himself. Daniel looked toward the west, where the faint outline of a cabin could be seen through the drifting white. Smoke struggled upward from a crooked chimney, thin and uneven. "Is that where you live?" Daniel asked. The boy nodded. "With my sister." "Sister? She's sick today. That's why I came out instead of her." Daniel frowned deeper. "You come out to do what exactly?" The boy took a slow step closer to the horse, eyes honest and wide. "To see if God finally answered." A chill ran through Daniel that had nothing to do with the weather. "Answered what?" The boy's small hands clenched into fists. "We asked him for somebody strong to help us not disappear." Daniel's throat tightened. "Disappear? We ain't got much food left. Mama died in the spring. Papa went looking for work down south 2 months back and never come home. The townsfolk don't come by our road anymore. They say we bring bad luck." A weight pressed down on Daniel's chest, heavy and unwelcome. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said more sharply now, The boy's lips trembled, but his voice stayed steady. I wasn't alone. I was waiting for you. Daniel's heart beat once, hard enough to make him aware of it. And what makes you think I'm the one you're waiting for? The boy's answer came without hesitation. Because you got the same eyes my papa had. Like you been through fire but didn't turn to ash. Daniel gripped the reins tighter. The past clawed at the inside of his skull. Fire. Smoke. Screams that never fully faded. There's no sense in what you're saying, son, he muttered. You don't even know my name. The boy gave a tiny, uncertain smile. Don't need to. You got a good face. Just a tired one. Daniel looked away, jaw tightening. He had heard many things said about him in the 6 years since the fire. Dangerous. Haunted. Broken. Cold. Never good. Go on back to your cabin, Daniel said. Get inside where it's warm. The boy didn't move. My sister's name is Emily, he said quietly. She don't talk much since Mama left. But she keeps saying, someone kind is gonna find us before the snow buries the world. Daniel stared down at this child who should have been arguing about toys or school or supper, not the end of the world. And you believe her? I believe she needs to be right. For a long moment the world stood utterly still. The snow paused in the air. The wind held its breath. Even his horse shifted less, as though waiting for a decision that mattered. I ain't the man you're looking for, Daniel said finally, though the words felt thin even to him. The boy stepped closer to the horse, fearless. Maybe I ain't looking for a perfect one. Just one who won't leave. That simple sentence struck deep. Daniel hadn't intended to stop. He hadn't intended to speak. He hadn't intended to even look at this forgotten piece of land. But now he found himself dismounting. The boy's eyes grew wide as Daniel's boots hit the snow beside him. You shouldn't trust strangers, Daniel said, looping the reins around a splintered fence post near the well. I ain't trustin', the boy replied. I'm hopin'. The word echoed in Daniel's chest. He looked toward the distant cabin again. The thin thread of smoke still rose, fragile against the gray sky. All right, son, he said quietly. Show me the way to your sister. The boy's face lit up in sudden, reverent wonder, like he had just witnessed a miracle. You really comin'? Just to see for myself, Daniel replied. Don't go building stories yet. But as the boy turned and began walking, crunching a narrow path through the snow toward the cabin, he glanced back once. Emily's gonna be so happy you chose us. Those 4 words sat heavier on Daniel than any saddle or pack he had ever carried. You chose us. He followed. The path was narrow, barely used, lined with weeds buried beneath frost. His eyes took in every small detail as they walked. The broken fence, the roof that sagged under its burden, the old swing hanging still from a bare tree. Inside, faint coughing could be heard even before they reached the door. The boy hurried up and pushed it open. The warmth inside hit Daniel's face like an unexpected embrace. And there, curled beneath a thin quilt beside a struggling fire, lay a small girl with dark hair tangled around her pale face. Her eyes turned toward the sound of the door opening. When she saw Daniel standing in the doorway behind her brother, her face broke into the softest smile he had seen in years. You came, she whispered. A man who had once survived fire, loss, and loneliness without flinching suddenly felt his hands begin to tremble. Some battles, he realized in that moment, did not announce themselves with guns or flames. Some battles came in the form of small voices, asking a broken man to stay. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with wood smoke and the faint, sharp scent of fever. Daniel stood in the doorway a moment longer than he meant to. The warmth did not feel like a comfort. It felt like a question, the kind that demanded an answer he wasn't ready to give. The boy, Jacob, he soon learned, hurried to the small bed. Emily, he whispered, pressing his cold fingers into her hand. He's real. I told you he would be. The girl's eyes, glassy but bright with hope, never left Daniel's face. I knew, she murmured. You look like someone who remembers what love feels like. The words cut deeper than any knife. Children were supposed to be careless, innocent. They were not supposed to see so clearly through a man's defenses. Daniel stepped further inside, his boots creaking softly against the wooden floor. The cabin was barely more than one room. A small trunk in one corner, a table made from rough boards near the hearth, 2 chipped cups on a shelf. a faded shawl hanging from a nail. Everything spoke of struggle and resilience. "How long she been like this?" Daniel asked quietly. "3 days," Jacob answered. "She don't eat much, just sleeps. Sometimes she sees Mama." Daniel knelt beside the bed, placing a careful hand on Emily's forehead. Even through his glove he could feel the heat burning beneath her skin. "Fever. A bad one?" "You should have gone to town," he said. Jacob's face fell. "They won't open the doors for us no more. They say sickness follows our name." Daniel's jaw tightened. Small towns had a way of deciding who belonged, and who no longer mattered. He pulled off his coat and draped it around Emily's thin shoulders. She smiled weakly. "You don't need that," she whispered. "I've carried worse," he replied. "Like fire?" Her voice trembled on the word. His hand froze for just a second. "Yes," he said, and left it at that. He looked to Jacob. "Is there any food left?" "Bit of bread. And some dried apples. That'll do for now. You get me clean water from the well. Slowly, don't slip." Jacob nodded, already moving with purpose. Daniel turned to the small fire. The wood within it was nearly gone. He searched for more logs, finding only a few splintered pieces. He stepped back outside. The snow still fell, but softer now. Quieter. The world remained indifferent to the life struggling in that tiny cabin. Daniel scanned the surroundings. Dead branches littered the ground from a nearby line of trees. He gathered what he could, snapping brittle limbs with bare, aching hands. Pain grounded him. He welcomed it. Inside again, he fed the flames. They leapt to life, casting warm orange across the girl's pale cheeks. Jacob returned with the water, sloshing in a cracked bucket. Daniel soaked a cloth and wrung it out, placing it gently across Emily's forehead. Her breathing eased slightly. "You're good at this," Jacob said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He wasn't thinking about how his hands remembered this. He wasn't thinking about the other small face he had once cooled with damp cloths. Through long, hopeless nights, he wouldn't go there. "I'm going to town," he said suddenly. Jacob's head snapped up. Fear filled his eyes. "You leaving?" "No," Daniel answered. "I'm going for medicine. And food. They won't give it to us. They might give it to me." Jacob studied his face carefully. "You ain't gonna disappear like Papa did?" The words pierced deeper than intended. Daniel crouched in front of him. "Listen close, son. I don't make promises lightly." He placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "But I give you my word I'm coming back before nightfall." Jacob nodded slowly. "That's all I need." Daniel stepped back into the biting cold. The world that had once felt empty now held a shape again. A purpose he hadn't chosen, but could no longer walk away from. He mounted his horse and turned toward the distant town, barely visible past the low hill. Every step closer to society felt like stepping into judgment. The town of Briar's Creek was small, too small for secrets, too small for forgiveness. Wooden buildings, huddled together as though frightened of the wild world beyond their borders. Men turned to look as he rode through, suspicion painted across their faces. A stranger always brought unease. When he dismounted in front of the general store, conversation inside dropped into silence. He stepped through the door. A bell chimed overhead. "Afternoon," he said. The shopkeeper, Mr. Alden, narrowed his eyes. "What can I do for you?" "I need fever tonic, clean cloth, and whatever food you're willing to spare for 2 children." A murmur rippled through the store. Alden crossed his arms. "Depends which children." "Harlan children," Daniel replied evenly. A few people shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the counter made the sign of the cross. "Ain't my business what you believe," Daniel said. His voice colder now, steadier. "But a little girl is burning up with fever." Alden exhaled, conflicted. "That family brings misfortune." "Misfortune don't look like a 9-year-old girl trying not to die," Daniel replied. Silence settled. A moment passed. "Then?" Alden turned around. He pulled a small brown bottle from the shelf, set it on the counter. "Then a sack of flour, a bit of meat, dried beans. You get her better," he muttered. "And don't bring trouble back on this town." Daniel slid coins across the wood, though he knew they were not enough. "I'll bring back only what I find," he said. Outside, as he mounted his horse again, he noticed a man leaning against the post office wall watching him. Tall, dark coat, sharp eyes. Sheriff Bramwell, a man known more for protecting money than people. You got business with the Harlan place? The sheriff asked. Daniel met his gaze steadily. I do now. Bramwell spat into the snow. Those children are cursed. Cross. People who get close to them don't tend to last long. Daniel didn't flinch. Then you better pray the curse don't mind company, he replied, and rode off. The ride back felt longer. The sky darkened, heavy clouds rolling across the horizon. When the cabin finally came into view, a faint light glowed from within. Daniel dismounted quickly, every muscle tense. He shoved open the door. Jacob looked up, relief washing over his face. You came back? Daniel let out a slow breath. Told you I would. He moved to Emily, giving her the tonic carefully, small sips at a time. Her eyelids fluttered. Her hand weakly curled into his sleeve. Don't leave, she whispered. I ain't going anywhere tonight, he said quietly. Jacob sat beside them, leaning his head against the bed. And in that silence, with firelight flickering and snow whispering outside, something inside Daniel shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but no longer running. Yet unknown to him. Outside in the dark, beyond the trees, a shadow watched the little cabin. And waited. The night pressed in around the cabin like a living thing. Wind whispered through the bare branches, brushing soft fingers against the warped wooden walls. The fire inside had burned down to a low, steady glow, just enough to keep the cold at bay. Shadows stretched long and thin, moving with each crackle of the coals. Daniel sat in a rough chair near the door, his back straight, alert despite fatigue creeping into his bones. Jacob and Emily slept on the narrow bed, bundled together beneath quilts far too thin for a winter like this. Emily's fever had broken an hour earlier, her breathing now slow and even, one small hand still gripped Daniel's coat as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. He did not pull away. Outside, the trees shifted again. Daniel's eyes lifted toward the door. He had felt it for some time now, the sense that something on the other side of the darkness was breathing along with him, listening, waiting. A soft crunch in the snow. Then another. Daniel slid the knife from his boot, stepping carefully to the door and pressing his ear to the cold wood. A low voice whispered just beyond it. He's in there. Another voice answered, barely louder. Sheriff said make him leave before morning. Daniel's jaw tightened. He reached for the lamp, turned the handle of the door, and yanked it open in one clean, forceful motion. Two men stood in the snow, frozen in surprise. Town men, farmers, rough-faced and nervous. One held a lantern. The other, a rifle that wavered slightly in unsteady hands. Evening, boys, Daniel said quietly. You lost? You ain't welcome here, Cross, the man with the rifle spat. Sheriff don't want your kind around the Harlan land. Daniel stepped onto the porch, the knife still concealed in his hand. And who appointed the sheriff judge of abandoned children? They ain't your concern. They are tonight. His voice was calm. Danger lived inside that calm now. Those kids been on cursed ground since their pa vanished. Folks who stay round long don't last. Daniel scoffed softly. Funny. Only folk I see dying in this county are the ones that talk too much. The lantern man swallowed. Best leave while you still can. Daniel stepped closer now until the men had no choice but to either stand or run. You go tell Sheriff Bramwell this for me, he said, eyes hard as iron. If he's got business with me, he can come discuss it himself. But he stays away from that door behind me. A long, heavy moment stretched between them. Then the men backed away, their fear outweighing whatever loyalty they had to authority. They turned and disappeared into the dark tree line. Daniel stood there for a long second, snow melting against his shoulders. Then he closed the door. Inside, Jacob was sitting up, eyes wide. They was gonna take us, wasn't they? Not tonight. Jacob glanced at Emily, then back at Daniel. People always been afraid of us since Pa died. But do you know what he always said? What's that, son? That folks fear truth more than curses. The candle flickered as if agreeing. Daniel returned to the chair. But rest would not come. The name Harlan had stirred things in town. Whispered things. Avoided things. And vanished men. He'd heard of the Harlan well long before he ever rode this road. Now he wondered if Thomas Harlan's disappearance had anything to do with those in power. Night wore on, thick and uneasy. Then, close to dawn, footsteps again. He didn't move this time, didn't speak, didn't open the door. The steps stopped directly outside. A firm knock followed. Not friendly, not uncertain, a command. Daniel stood, slow, deliberate. Opened the door. Sheriff Bramwell stood alone this time. Hat brim low, coat heavy, eyes sharp as flint. "You got spirit," he said calmly. "That makes you dangerous out here." "Funny," Daniel replied. "I was thinking the same about you." Bramwell's gaze slid briefly toward the bed inside, toward the small sleeping forms. Something dark crossed his features for half a second. "You don't know what you're swimming in," the sheriff said. "That girl's father stuck his nose where it didn't belong." "Where was that?" "Where money moved without witnesses." Daniel's expression hardened. "Thomas Harlan didn't die in an accident, did he?" Silence. Then Bramwell smiled. "Ain't no proof a man ever died at all. He just up and vanished. Same as you would if you keep digging." A spike of cold hit Daniel's spine. "He saw something," Daniel pressed. "Didn't he?" "He owed money. He earned enemies." He wanted to talk. Sheriff leaned closer, voice dark and low. "And talking men tend to disappear around here." From inside the cabin, Emily stirred, murmuring Daniel's name in sleep. Bramwell's eyes flicked toward the sound. "She's a sweet little thing," he said quietly. "Would be a shame if misfortune found her too." That was the moment Daniel knew. This wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. Daniel stepped forward so fast Bramwell flinched. "You touch a hair? On that girl or her brother?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sheriff stared him down for a long, tense second, then straightened. "You got 3 days," he said. 3 days to ride away from this place before things turn more painful." He stepped off the porch and vanished into the morning fog without another word. The first light of dawn painted the world pale blue. Jacob stood beside Daniel now. "He's the one, ain't he?" Daniel didn't answer. He just stared toward the well in the distance, half hidden beneath a new layer of snow. Something terrible had happened there, something buried. And it wasn't only a body. It was a secret. "I ain't leaving," Daniel finally said. Jacob looked up at him in quiet awe. "Are you staying for good then?" Daniel knelt in front of him, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. "I'm staying long enough to make sure nobody ever scares you or Emily again." Jacob nodded slowly. "That's all we ever wanted." Then Emily woke, her eyes clearer now, fever gone. "You're still here," she smiled. "And I will be tomorrow too," he answered. Outside the sun crept higher, shining down on the frozen land. But somewhere beneath the smooth white surface, dark truth waited to be uncovered. And Daniel Cross was no longer just passing through. He was about to become the man this town would remember. The third dawn rose over Harlan land with a strange kind of hush. No birds sang. No wind stirred the bare branches. Even the snow seemed to hold itself still, as if the ground beneath it remembered something it did not wish to reveal. Daniel stood outside the cabin, staring at the old stone well in the distance. 5 crooked walls, half collapsed, black and silent in the pale light. Buried secrets did not stay buried forever. They simply waited for someone brave enough to ask. Inside, Jacob and Emily were eating small pieces of bread, their movements quiet but more hopeful than they had been days before. "You're really gonna go out there, ain't you?" Jacob asked. Daniel glanced back at him. "I am." Emily's eyes softened. "Papa always said the truth lives in dark places because it's scared of loud men." "And what about quiet men?" Daniel asked. She gave a tiny smile. "Quiet men listen." Daniel grabbed a coil of rope, a lantern, and a heavy iron hook he had found in the shed behind the cabin. The wood creaked beneath his boots as he walked away from them. Jacob followed to the door. "Be careful." "I intend to be," Daniel answered. "Stay inside. Bar the door. If anyone comes, you don't open it for the devil himself." Jacob nodded once, swallowing his fear. Daniel stepped into the snow and began walking toward the well. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of the snow, but because of the memories he could feel pressing up from the ground beneath his feet. The closer he came, the colder the air grew. Standing before the broken stones, he peered over the edge. Darkness stared back, cold and endless. He lowered the lantern. The small light trembled as it descended, revealing only rough, wet stone walls and deep waiting black. No water shimmered, only absence, Then something caught the light. A shape. Not stone, not root. Bone. Daniel's grip on the rope tightened. He pulled slowly, carefully, bit by bit. The truth rose from the earth. A boot. A leg. A torn coat. Then finally, the pale, still face of a man who had once had a family. Laughter. A name that had been spoken with love. Thomas Harlan. Time and darkness had taken much, but not everything. And as Daniel lifted the body fully into the light, something glinted in the snow beneath it. A gold pocket watch, engraved with the town seal. The same seal Sheriff Bramwell wore on his coat. Daniel stared at it, understanding washing over him. Thomas hadn't vanished. He had been silenced. A sound behind him. Hooves grinding snow. Daniel turned. Bramwell sat mounted 20 feet away, rifle resting lazily across his saddle. "So you went looking after all," he said. "Curiosity always drags a man to the grave." "You put him here?" Bramwell shrugged slightly. "He learned more than he was meant to. Happens to the bold ones. He had children." "So does the world," Bramwell replied coldly. "That doesn't make a thief innocent." Daniel stepped forward. "What did he steal?" "Truth." Silence pressed in again. "I couldn't let him talk," Bramwell continued. "Men in my position rely on quiet towns." "You're not a lawman," Daniel said, his voice deep and steady. "You're just another murderer who wears a badge." Bramwell's eyes hardened. "Then I suppose I'll have to add one more to the well." The rifle lifted. Before the trigger could pull, a second gun fired. The sound cracked across the frozen fields. Bramwell's chest jerked. Surprise flashed across his face. He looked down slowly, seeing the spreading red on his coat. Behind Daniel stood Alden, the storekeeper, and two other men from town. "We heard everything," Alden said quietly. "Some of us been waiting a long time for proof." Bramwell slid from his horse, collapsing onto the snow. The power he had clung to bled into the earth along with him. Daniel knelt beside Thomas once more. "Your children are safe now," he said under his breath. The town gathered slowly around the well as the truth spread. Faces that had once turned away now looked with shame and regret. A preacher removed his hat. A woman covered her mouth with trembling fingers. And the same people who once whispered "curse" now whispered "forgive us." By afternoon, Thomas Harlan was carried home. Properly, with dignity. Emily and Jacob stood by the doorway as the townsfolk approached. Heads lowered, hearts heavy. "I think we found your papa," Daniel said softly. Emily stared at the covered shape, tears in her eyes. "Was he brave?" she asked. "He never stopped trying to do what was right." She nodded gently. "Then I'm proud." The small hands that once trembled now held strong. That evening, the town lit lanterns down the road that led to the Harlan cabin, as if finally seeing them, as if finally welcoming them back into the world. Weeks passed. Snow melted. The ground softened. Daniel stayed. He did not ride on. He split wood, mended fences, fixed the old roof before spring storms came, helped Jacob with numbers, taught Emily to fish once the river thawed. The little girl who once burned with fever now laughed freely in the grass. The boy who waited by a well now ran fearlessly through fields. And the man who once fled from memories now found peace sitting on the porch each night as the sun dipped. Beyond the horizon, one evening Emily came and sat beside him. "Daniel?" she said quietly. "Yes, darlin'? You never told us where your family went." He closed his eyes for a moment. The old scars did not disappear, but they no longer bled the same. "They went to heaven a long time ago," he answered. She leaned her head against his arm. "Then maybe heaven sent you back down again, just a little later." The stars above flickered into life. This time Daniel did not feel alone beneath them, because home was no longer something he had lost. It was something he had found, right where two small souls had been brave enough to hope.